My name is Vanessa Tran. I'm 27 years old, a Harvard-trained corporate attorney, and tonight I was told I don't belong in the empire I've spent my life preparing to lead. That was the moment everything cracked. I stood in my father's glass-walled office on the 47th floor of Tran Holdings, staring at the skyline of downtown San Francisco. The room smelled of leather, pine, and old money. My pulse thundered in my ears as I tried to breathe. He sat behind his grand mahogany desk, steepling his fingers, perfectly calm. "You're not taking over the firm, Vanessa," he said, his voice cool, clipped, as if this decision were as routine as approving payroll. "It'll go to Victor." Victor, my younger brother who never even finished law school, who spent more time in private jets and overpriced clubs than inside a courtroom. I blinked, trying to process. "Dad, I've worked every summer here since I was 16. I brought in 6 new clients this year alone." "You'll have a wonderful future," he cut me off. "As a wife, a mother, this world is too cutthroat for someone like you." Someone like me? A woman? In that moment, something in me split wide open. This wasn't just about the job, it was about my place in this family, in this world, and I wasn't going to let it be decided by anyone else. Before we go further, if you've ever had to fight for the seat you earned, especially when others tried to define your worth, hit that like button, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe. You're not alone in this. Back in that office, I straightened my spine. My voice was steady, though my heart broke with every word. "If Victor's your legacy," I said, "then I'll build one of my own, from the ground up, without you." And I walked out. That's how this story begins. And trust me, it only gets more powerful from here. From the outside, the Tran family looked flawless, an empire built over 4 decades, spanning law, finance, and real estate. My father, Daniel Tran, was a titan in San Francisco's legal world. My mother, Mai, was the portrait of elegance and silence. And then there was Victor, my younger brother, charming, irresponsible, entitled, the golden son. Me? I was always the one who got things done. While Victor skipped lectures and partied in Monaco, I studied past midnight, chased internships, and graduated magna cum laude from Harvard Law. I didn't just earn a seat at the table, I carved it with my own hands. But none of that mattered the moment gender entered the room. My father's values were carved from a different century, one where sons carried the name and daughters learned to support from the sidelines. He'd never say it out loud, but it was there, in the way he always looked past me in meetings, the way my accomplishments were treated as admirable hobbies, not serious credentials. And now, as he handed the reins of Tran Holdings to Victor, it was undeniable. I was never meant to be the heir. I was only ever the help. It didn't matter that I'd negotiated our largest acquisition to date. It didn't matter that half the firm's junior staff looked to me for leadership. My blood, my title, my credentials, none of it could rewrite the role I'd been assigned at birth. "You'll be happier this way," he said, as if this was kindness. "You can still have a seat at the table, just not the head." I wanted to scream, to throw every case file, every late night, every achievement back at him, but instead I stood still, his words slicing deeper than I expected. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about me. It was about every woman who's been told she's capable, but not quite enough. Every daughter trained to lead, only to be asked to follow. My mother stood nearby, silent as always. Her eyes flickered with something, pain maybe, or memory. She too had once dreamed of running her own consulting firm before she married into legacy. She gave up her voice to preserve peace, but I couldn't follow her footsteps, not anymore, because legacies should be earned, not inherited, and I would build mine on merit, not tradition. That day, I didn't just lose a title. I found the fight I didn't know I still had. I didn't always carry fire in my chest. That spark was lit years ago, long before the boardrooms and the betrayals, by a woman whose name is rarely spoken in our family anymore. My grandmother, Lien. She marched in protests with nothing but a borrowed bullhorn and blistered feet. She wrote op-eds that stirred both hope and fury. She once told me, when I was only 10, Power isn't about shouting louder than men, Vanessa. It's about never needing their permission to speak. That sentence became the quiet compass of my life. While my father idolized empire and my brother coasted on expectation, I chased impact. Even as a child, I didn't ask for attention. I earned it. My walls were covered not with fashion posters or movie stars, but with newspaper clippings and case summaries. I read trial transcripts like bedtime stories and argued with my teachers, not to rebel, but because I was certain there was a better way. When I arrived at Harvard Law, I wasn't the loudest or the most socially polished, but I was relentless. I took the classes no one wanted. I studied the dull, technical cases until they sang in my veins. I watched my classmates burn out, party, quit. I stayed. Every summer, I returned to Tran Holdings, filing contracts, shadowing partners, eating alone in the cafeteria while Victor was escorted through meetings like a visiting prince. I didn't resent the work. I welcomed it. Because I believed, truly believed, that when the time came, my father would see what I'd become. That belief was my first mistake. But the second? Thinking I needed his validation at all. See, strength doesn't always come from confrontation. It comes from clarity, from knowing that everything you've built, every paper, every sleepless night, every firm handshake in a room full of men who forgot your name the second you walked out, is not wasted. It's stored, compounded, ready. I've been overlooked, yes, undervalued, called sharp but intense, brilliant but too driven. And still I rise, not in spite of those labels, but because of them, because beneath the polished blazers and the controlled tone is a woman shaped by generations of silence who chose something different. I'm not fearless, but I am done asking for space. I am not my brother's shadow. I am not my father's second best. I am Vanessa Tran. And if I was born into the wrong legacy, I'll build a new one from scratch, louder, sharper, and too driven to stop. And this time, no one gets to look away. The morning I left the house I grew up in, it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like a funeral. The mansion on Pacific Heights was quiet, except for the wheels of my suitcase thudding softly against the marble. Every corner I passed held memories, some sweet, most complicated. The curved staircase where I used to sit cross-legged with textbooks. The grand piano in the foyer I never learned to play because law school mattered more. The hall where my father once told me I made him proud, for a moment that now felt like fiction. I walked past the portrait of our family, my father, tall and commanding, my mother, elegant and composed, Victor, smiling as if life owed him something, and me, tucked on the side, expression too serious for a girl of 13. Even in our own home, I had never quite belonged. My mother stood near the kitchen island, fingers nervously twisting the hem of her silk robe. "Vanessa," she said gently, "where will you go?" I paused, my hand tightening on the handle of my suitcase. "Somewhere I can breathe." She looked like she wanted to say more but didn't, and maybe that was the heartbreak. Hers had never been a loud betrayal. It was the kind done in silence, in standing still when I needed her to move, in protecting the image of peace while I quietly shattered inside. My father didn't come down. I imagined him in his study, sipping his black coffee, already rewriting the story. To him, I was emotional, disrespectful, ungrateful. Never mind that I had poured my soul into his firm, that I'd believed in the idea of legacy more than anyone. Victor was leaning against the front door, gym bag slung over his shoulder, smirking like this was all just a phase. "So this is it?" he asked. "You're quitting?" I met his eyes without blinking. "I'm choosing." "There's a difference." He scoffed, stepped aside, and let me pass. No apology, no understanding, just dismissal. The air outside was sharp, biting through my coat. For a moment, I stood on the steps, suitcase beside me, watching the fog roll over the bay. I had no apartment lined up yet, no job offer in hand, just a resume, a will forged in fire, and a name I intended to redefine. Vanessa Tran, not the daughter of Daniel, not Victor's older sister. Just me. Walking down that driveway felt like shedding skin. I wasn't walking away from a home, I was walking toward one I'd build myself. No gold-framed portraits, no velvet silence, just honesty and room to rise. And for the first time in years, I felt something steady pulse in my chest. Not anger, not sorrow, freedom. The office at Carter & Locke wasn't nearly as grand as my father's. No marble floors, no skyline view, no gold-lettered nameplate on the door. But it had something I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. My first day felt like stepping into unfamiliar air. Everything was quieter, humbler, but real. No one looked twice at my last name. No one whispered, legacy. They only saw my resume, my credentials, my conviction. Daniel Carter, one of the founding partners, was the kind of man who built success from the ground up. He'd grown up in a working-class neighborhood in Oakland, clawed his way through public school and law school scholarships, and now ran one of the city's most respected mid-size litigation firms. When he shook my hand, it was firm, warm, and free of pretense. "You're here because you're good," he said, "not because you're someone's daughter." Those words lodged deep in me, like stitches I didn't know I needed. I was handed a modest office and a stack of case files. No one coddled me. No one doubted me either. They gave me room to work, and I did. I threw myself into every detail, read every deposition, annotated every precedent. I didn't care about the hours. I didn't care about the missing view. I cared that I was seen, not tolerated, not managed, respected. Each case became a small act of reclamation. When I helped a single mother win a wrongful termination suit, I felt more victorious than I ever had drafting multi-million-dollar mergers for my father's firm. When I defended a startup against a predatory investor, I stayed up for 36 hours straight preparing. No one asked me to. No one had to. I wanted to be here. Still, the nights were hard. I lived in a small one-bedroom apartment downtown. No housekeeper, no catered meals, no vintage wine cabinet. Just takeout containers, stacks of folders, and a window view of people I didn't know yet. And sometimes, when the world quieted, I missed them. My mother's gentle voice through the door. Victor's careless laugh echoing down the hallway. Even the heavy silence of my father's disapproval. It was familiar, a language I'd grown up speaking. But I didn't go back, because every morning I walked into Carter & Locke, I felt my spine straighten a little more. I was building something, not just a career, but a version of myself untouched by legacy, by duty, by the constant need to prove my worth. I was no longer chasing a seat at someone else's table, I was carving out my own. And brick by brick, case by case, I was learning that power didn't always come in family names or penthouse views. Sometimes it came in the simple act of showing up, fully, relentlessly, and on your own terms. At Carter & Locke, my days were full. Court hearings, client meetings, research briefs that stretched past midnight. My calendar was a mosaic of color-coded blocks, each one carved with purpose. From the outside, I looked like a woman on the rise. But when the office lights dimmed and I stepped into the quiet of my apartment, something always followed me in. Silence. The kind of silence that wrapped around your chest when you took your coat off and realized no one was waiting for you. No dinner being warmed, no familiar footsteps padding down the hall. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the ache in your ribs. Some nights I'd sit by the window with a cup of tea I never finished. Watch the city below flicker and blur behind the glass. I could see the lights from Pacific Heights, just far enough to remind me of everything I'd left. Just close enough to hurt. I missed my mother more than I let myself admit. Her soft touch on my shoulder when I worked too late. The way she'd leave fresh-cut jasmine by my bedside on exam days. Her voice, never loud, always careful, as if the wrong word could shatter the peace she worked so hard to maintain. And yes, I even missed Victor. His arrogance, his terrible playlists, his unbothered laugh during family dinners when I tried, desperately, to make our father see me. Even the pain had shape now, memory had teeth, and yet I didn't regret leaving, because with every ache came clarity. At Tran Holdings, I was invisible in plain sight. Here I was rising, slowly, deliberately. With every brief I filed, every client I won, I stitched a new layer over the bruises they left behind. My scars weren't gone, but they were mine, proof I had survived something that tried to define me. Still, there were nights when I wondered, had I been too rash? What if I had waited longer, fought harder, swallowed my pride and stayed? Would my father have changed his mind? Would my mother have spoken up? But then I'd remember his words. This firm isn't your place. And the fire would return. Because love should never come with a condition. Belonging shouldn't be negotiated. I wasn't asking for special treatment. I was demanding fairness. And if that made me difficult, so be it. I didn't leave because I gave up on them. I left because I finally stopped giving up on myself. And in the solitude of those evenings, between the longing and the rebuilding, I started to see her more clearly, the woman I was becoming. Not the daughter, not the heir, just Vanessa. And she was worth knowing. It was a Thursday afternoon when everything shifted again. I had just wrapped up a deposition and returned to my office at Carter & Locke when Daniel Carter knocked lightly on the open door. "Got a minute?" he asked, his tone unreadable. I nodded, setting down my notes. Of course. We walked together to his office, glass walls, river view, minimal decor except for a framed quote behind his desk. Build the table if they won't give you a seat. I'd always loved that. Daniel sat down, folded his hands, and looked at me intently. Vanessa, there's a new case, high profile, intense, and I want you to lead it. I leaned forward, curious. What's the situation? He hesitated. Our client is suing Tran Holdings. Malpractice tied to a real estate contract. The damages could run into 8 figures. My breath caught. The name rang through me like a cold wind. My father's firm. I know what I'm asking, Daniel said quietly. You don't have to answer right now. I didn't speak. Couldn't. My thoughts scattered like papers in a storm. Facing my father and Victor in court wasn't just a legal challenge, it was personal. They weren't just on the other side of the table, they were the table I was never allowed to sit at. Daniel continued, I wouldn't offer you this if I didn't think you were ready. You know their operation, their language, their weaknesses. You're our best shot. The flattery didn't comfort me. This wasn't about strategy. This was about blood. Could I go up against the very people I once begged to accept me? What would that mean for whatever connection we had left, even if it was frayed, wounded, nearly non-existent? But another voice inside me whispered, they already made their choice. They made it the day they passed me over, the day they told me my value was less because of my gender, the day I walked out and no one followed. I asked for the evening to think it over. That night I sat at my window again. The skyline shimmered with possibility, but my chest felt heavy. I thought about my mother. Would she understand? Or would she see it as betrayal? I thought about Victor. Would he laugh, dismiss me again? And my father, would he finally see me? By morning I knew I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it for justice. For every client wronged. For every daughter silenced. For the woman I was when they turned their backs on me. I walked into Daniel's office, my voice steady. I'll take the case. He didn't smile. He nodded, solemn. Then let's get to work. The war had begun, and this time I wasn't knocking on their door for approval. I was coming through the front, briefcase in hand, truth at my back. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature but in presence, in memory. When I stepped through those double doors, briefcase in hand, I wasn't just an attorney walking into trial, I was a daughter returning to the house that never welcomed her. On the opposing table sat my father, Daniel Tran, in a tailored navy suit, his expression unreadable. Beside him, Victor, smirking in that casual, condescending way he'd perfected since childhood, tapped his pen like this was a game he was destined to win. But this wasn't a game. This was war. And I came ready. I took my seat across from them, straightened my blazer, and opened my file. My hands were steady, my pulse slower than expected. There was no fear left, just focus, just fire. When proceedings began, I became who I had trained to be all these years, not the girl they overlooked, but the attorney they underestimated. Victor opened with a shaky statement, overconfident but flimsy. His arguments meandered. He misquoted a clause and faltered when questioned on precedent. My former mentors, men who once praised him for merely showing up, shifted uncomfortably behind him. Then I stood. The courtroom hushed. Every word I spoke was precise, built on months of preparation and a lifetime of silence I refused to carry anymore. I didn't just refute Victor's arguments, I dismantled them, calmly, methodically. Each document I presented struck like a blade. Each objection I raised landed clean. My father remained still beside him, face tight, jaw clenched. His eyes met mine only once. I held the stare, then returned to my notes like he was any other opposing counsel, because today, he was. The judge leaned forward often when I spoke, pen poised. The opposing counsel scrambled, and for the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone in that room to see my worth, because it was already shining through every legal brief, every firm sentence, every winced reaction from the other side. By the third session, it was clear the tide had turned. Perez Legal Group was crumbling under the weight of its own negligence and arrogance. They proposed a settlement. We negotiated hard. The final agreement overwhelmingly favored our client. As we signed the documents, I glanced across the table. Victor refused to meet my eyes. My father, for once, looked older, not defeated, but perhaps uncertain, as if he was finally beginning to understand. They packed their briefcases and left in silence. No nod, no handshake, no acknowledgement. It stung, more than I expected. I'd imagined a moment of reckoning, some word of respect, however small. But there was nothing. And yet, in that silence, I found peace. Because I didn't walk into that courtroom to be seen. I walked in to win. And I did. Not for revenge, but for every version of myself they tried to erase. I wasn't expecting him. It was a quiet morning at Carter & Locke, the usual rhythm of ringing phone. Muted footsteps and coffee cups clinking filled the hallway. I had just arrived, still removing my coat, when Daniel approached me, his expression unreadable. "Vanessa," he said gently, "your father's here. He's in your office." My breath caught. I don't know what I expected. Maybe never to see him again. Maybe another silence. Maybe nothing at all. But as I stepped into my office, there he was, Daniel Tran. The man who had once told me the firm wasn't my place. Now sitting across from my desk, hands clasped, shoulders tense. "Vanessa," he said, rising slowly, "I needed to see you." I closed the door behind me. He took a breath, his voice lower than I remembered. "I watched you in court. You were remarkable." I said nothing. "I've seen hundreds of lawyers in my life," he continued, "but none argued the way you did. You were surgical, focused, unshakable." His eyes met mine, not with pride, but with something more vulnerable. Regret. "I was wrong," he said. "I thought legacy meant handing it to Victor, to a son. I didn't see what was in front of me." He hesitated. "You've earned what I never gave." Silence settled between us like dust. Then, almost carefully, "I want you to come back. To lead. To take Tran Holdings where I never could." I didn't move. Part of me wanted to cry. Another part wanted to laugh. But mostly, I felt the weight of history pressing against my ribs. "What about Victor?" I asked quietly. "He'll stay," he said. "But in a role that fits him. This is yours, if you want it." I studied him. The father who once doubted me now offering the empire he once guarded. It wasn't triumph I felt, it was a kind of grief for all the years wasted. "I'll need time," I said. He nodded. "Take what you need." At the door, he paused. "Vanessa, I'm proud of you. You're better than I ever was." And with that, he left, leaving behind a legacy not of inheritance, but of choice. And it was finally mine to make. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as the city lights flickered faintly through the blinds. My father's offer echoed in my mind over and over. Come back, lead Tran Holdings. It's yours now. It was everything I once begged for. The title, the recognition, the power to shape the firm, not just as a lawyer, but as a leader. The girl who once stood outside her father's office door, waiting to be seen, would have said yes in a heartbeat, but I wasn't her anymore. Now I had Carter and Locke, a place where I wasn't someone's daughter, but someone who mattered on her own terms. I had built trust, earned respect, and stitched together a future with my own hands, not my father's permission. And yet, the thought lingered. Could I return and rebuild Tran Holdings into something better, something fairer? Could I rewrite its legacy not as Daniel Tran's daughter, but as Vanessa, the woman who rose without it? Or would stepping back into that world reopen every wound I'd just begun to heal? The truth is, I didn't have the answer, not yet. But what I knew with every fiber of my being was this: whatever I chose, whether I went back or stayed the course, it would be on my terms this time, without compromise, without shrinking, without silence. Because after everything I've lived, everything I've fought, I no longer needed to prove myself. I just needed to choose myself. So here I am, at the crossroads between legacy and freedom, history and purpose. And I want to ask you, if you were me, what would you do? Would you go back and take the seat they once said you couldn't have? Or would you keep walking the path you carved with your own name? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I truly want to hear them. And if this story spoke to something inside you, hit like, subscribe, and stay with me. There are more stories ahead, more battles, more choices, and sometimes just knowing someone else is listening makes all the difference.